And I was trying to make also Yang Hua. Okay? Yeah, correct. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the Future of Work and Care workshop. This workshop is funded by the Australian Sociological Association. So I would like to thank Australian Sociological Association, or we call TASA, for funding us, for organizing this workshop. And I'm organizing this workshop as part of the Sociology of Work, Labor and Economy thematic group. And I have two lovely co-conveners, Yang Hua. So Yang Hua will introduce herself later, and then Shiri. So Shiri will present a paper today, and she apologizes she couldn't join us for the introduction, but she will join me. And so I would keep it brief. So before I say anything further, I'd like to start with the acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we work, learn, and live, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and future, and acknowledges the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the academy. As a community of researchers, teachers, professional staff, and the students, we are privileged to work and learn every day with Indigenous colleagues and partners. Thank you. Yang Hua, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah. So thank you everyone for being here. So today's after today's workshop, we are going to organize a special issue. If you are interested in submitting your paper for the special issue as well, please let Lata me know. Send an email to us. Today we are going to record your presentation, but if you don't want your presentation to be recorded, please let us know. Either send me an email or you can let me know in person if you are in the room. The discussion won't be recorded, okay? Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you, Yang Hua. And about the facilities, so we have toilets both sides. It's between like level 4 and level 5 for female toilets, and then male toilets level 5 between like level 5 and level 6 stairs. If there's a fire, we'll go down the stairs and then we'll meet in the south lawn. That's pretty much it. Other thing about something, but it's clear. Oh, about the structure of the workshop today. So the way we would do, like all presenters will present first, then we will take questions for each session. And now I know we are all waiting for Elizabeth to speak, so I'll just give everyone 1 minute and then introduce Elizabeth, and then Elizabeth will deliver her speech. Yeah, 10 minutes for the part. Yes. Yeah, 10 minutes present. Yeah. And the time of presentation is like 10 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes question and answer. And so we'll take all questions at the end of the presentation of every session. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks, Lara. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So Professor Elizabeth Hill is with us today. As you can see, so I'm going to just introduce Professor Elizabeth Hill, and then Professor Hill could share her screen, and then she would present. Professor Elizabeth Hill is located in the Department of Political Economy at the University of Sydney. She's the Deputy Director of the Gender Equality and Working Life Research Initiative, co-convener of the Australian Work and Family Policy Roundtable, and co-convener of the Body at Work project. As a leading researcher on the future of women, work, and care in Australia and the Asian region, excuse me, she has collaborated on research into gender equality, work, and care with leading national and international institutions, including the International Labour Organization and UN Women. Elizabeth's research focused on how economic institutions shape women's paid work, unpaid care, and the care workforce, especially as they evolve in response to the rapidly evolving dynamics of the global political economy. Elizabeth has served as a non-executive director on a number of non-profit boards and is an experienced media commentator and advisor to government, unions, and business. She is currently a member of the New South Wales Women's Advisory Council. Let's welcome Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Lutfan, for that very kind introduction. I also want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you from the University of Sydney's Camperdown campus, which is located on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. And I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And this morning, I especially want to pay my respects to the women and girls who have cared for country and continue to care for country as they work to sustain culture and build community well-being. So I will just share my slides now. You'll have to unshare in order for me to share. Thank you.
Yes, it's working. Nice.
Okay, that's there. Okay, so my topic this morning is building an equitable future of work and care. And for those of us who are interested in human well-being, sustainability, equality, and justice, this is not only a critically important topic that sits at the heart of our economy and society, but it's also one that currently sits at the top of state and Commonwealth governments' policy agendas. And it's not often that our research interests and expertise align with government priorities and budgets, but post-pandemic, this is where we find ourselves. An exciting, long overdue, and very challenging moment. So it's an exciting moment because government and industry are seeking out and listening to the research evidence. At the moment, academic research is shaping public policy. So that makes many of us dance around with excitement. But it's also long overdue. Australia has been an international laggard on work and care policy settings. And you may not know, or you may have forgotten, that it wasn't until 2010 that Australia legislated a national paid parental leave system and a right to request flexible work arrangements. So apart from the USA, most other high-income economies and many middle-income economies had already implemented a national paid parental leave scheme, and that was long before us. Of course, in Australia, public servants and employees in some of our largest corporations had access to periods of paid leave and had enjoyed those for a long time. And of course, all workers had access to unpaid leave. But it was only in 2010 that every Australian worker was provided access to a period of paid leave. Now, initially, this was set at 18 weeks, paid at the minimum wage. That was rolled out in 2011, and 2 years later, in 2013, 2 weeks of what was then called dad and partner pay was added to the program. Last year, the national system was updated and lengthened, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. But we also lag in many other policy domains. So the current focus on work and care is super welcome at the public level. So we've got politicians and industry and policymakers interested after being asleep at the wheel, we would argue, for a long time. But this isn't an easy moment. It's a very challenging moment. And this is because Australia's history on work and care policy is fraught, it's complicated, and in many respects has been dominated by pragmatic and politicised decision-making rather than thoughtful system design. Since Federation in 1901, the development of Australia's welfare and industrial relations system has laid the foundation for the wide variety of policies that make up our work care policy architecture. And that makes it very different to what's found in other countries. This institutional history partially explains the complexity of our systems, but so too does the history of the different political ideologies which imbue our policy framework. The changes in work and care policy over recent decades have been dramatic, as we've moved from a government-funded and controlled system, largely, to one closely tied to employment and privatised, often for for-profit delivery. In so many areas, the egg has been so well and truly scrambled that we find ourselves lumbered with systems that are fundamentally broken, inequitable, and not fit for profit. Systems that do not provide accessible, affordable, high-quality care supports for workers and those they care for, and workplaces and job design constrained by 19th century ideas about productivity and the organisation of work. Alongside the changing nature of work and rapid demographic changes, our work and care systems are barely surviving. So acute was the state of play that in 2019, when my colleague, Professor Marion Baird, and I planned a book that took stock of Australia's work care policy settings, our working title was At Breaking Point. The pandemic interrupted that book, like so many other things, but by 2021, we were ready to return to the project, and we found we needed to revisit our working title. And earlier this year, a couple of months ago, we published an edited volume called At a Turning Point: Work, Care and Family Policies in Australia. And that's the book that I'm drawing on in this presentation. So we have moved from a breaking point to a turning point. And the name change reflects the new policy environment. Yet there's so much more to be done, and new issues and challenges constantly arise. The challenge is to find ways forward that provide high quality opportunities for work and for care for everyone, not just knowledge workers, not just those who live in the cities, not just those who enjoy full citizenship rights, but everyone who works in Australia and cares for family and friends and community, both here and elsewhere. Our work care systems and policy framework must have space to address the specific needs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. It must have space to address the unique needs of visa workers, those who live in rural and remote areas, and workers employed in essential frontline services. So, where do we find ourselves now? And how do we craft a gender equitable future of work and care? So I wanted to kind of start really by painting a bit of a picture of the post-pandemic policy context, because this is influencing so much of the conversation and is one of the reasons why these issues have finally got to the top of government and industry priority lists. So if we take a gender perspective, we know, and this should be familiar to many of you, that women came out of the pandemic experience whiplashed and weary. They lost more jobs and hours than men, but post-lockdown bounced back to historically high rates of participation. Women absorbed disproportionate amounts of the pandemic-induced unpaid care load. So we know that women entered the pandemic shouldering more unpaid work than men. And while during COVID, men certainly did more unpaid work than they did before COVID, women took on the largest share of the additional load and did even more. And that meant that the gender gap in the unpaid care workload actually widened. Partly as a result of this and everything else that was going on, there's really strong evidence to show that women suffered a shadow pandemic of stress, of violence, and of disrespect. Post-pandemic, we've seen significant public discussion and new practices of remote and flexible working. And this is certainly a pandemic-induced change, the move to work from home and other forms of hybrid working. But often this is talked about in relation to care responsibilities. But in our research, we find that the work from home and hybrid experience is not only important for those with care responsibilities, but also for others for different sets of reasons. We're in a context of tight labour markets and workforce challenges, particularly workforce sustainability challenges, abound. And these put additional pressure on working hours and demand for care, even as our care workforces are crumbling. High inflation, rising interest rates, and cost of living crisis means that more and more households need two incomes to manage. And this creates a new layer to the care deficit and associated family stress. Finally, we're in a context of active public discussion of respect and sexism at work, and particularly in the last couple of weeks, domestic and family violence. And this broad discussion is directly linked to women's labour market experience and their economic security. So what does all this boil down to in terms of patterns of work and care in contemporary Australia? So just to remind you, women's workforce participation in paid work has been converging over the past couple of decades with men's, albeit with a significant gap. So you'll notice on this latest, just raw participation data, there's still a gap between men's and women's participation on average of around 7.6 percentage points. And yet female labour force participation, you can see, is at an historic high. And this is why we talk about women being whiplashed and weary, losing more jobs and hours than men, bouncing back to an historically high participation rate, second lockdown, go down again, and can then return to trend and continue to post historic highs. So it's not just that raw participation, but there's also an increase in the proportion of total hours worked in Australia that are being done by women. What's slower to change is women's participation across sectors, within occupations, and around job quality. So all those factors of gendered inequalities in the labour market, those patterns remain even as we've seen some improvement in participation. So women are still dominate those low paid and less secure forms of employment. We've also definitely moved in practice away from the old breadwinner model of the household to more of a worker-carer model, where men and women with young children in particular are in paid work. And increasingly, they're both in full-time work. So you can see on the latest data here from AFES and from the ABS that almost 3/4 of couples with children under 15 have two working parents. That is a significant shift. And of that group, around a third have both parents working full-time, and another third are still on that full-time, part-time combination that is a particular feature, or has been a particular feature, of the Australian labour market. What is interesting as well is that in 1/4 of couple families with kids, very young kids, those aged 0 to 4, both parents are working full-time. So again, this pushes back against the idea that, women only return to full-time work once the kids are maybe at high school. So we're seeing that pattern of two full-time workers with dependent children click in much earlier. And this is also reflected, this kind of trend is reflected in single mothers who have very young children under school age who are employed full-time. About 1/4 of those are employed full-time and 1/4 are employed part-time. If we move beyond just children and think about those workers who are caring for aged, ill, and people with disability in their families, we know from Carers Australia and from the ABS that 7 out of 10 carers who have significant care and sustained care responsibilities, they are also in paid employment. 72% of male carers are in paid employment, and 63% of female carers are in paid employment. In this context of the kind of recalibration of work and care in Australian households, we also know that young fathers' aspirations are changing. So our national research shows that men's aspirations around a successful future of work is converging with young women's and includes participating in the care of young children. So you've got a convergence in men and women's experience in the paid labour market, at least in their participation. And you've also got a convergence in young men, young mothers and young fathers' aspirations to provide care for their family and their community. We don't know whether that aspiration is translating into action. That's yet to be seen, but certainly the desire is present. And if you look around some parts of your cities, again, it's highly disaggregated by location, but there are some locations where you actually do see this playing out, but that's just a form of anecdata. We're waiting to see how the real data comes through, particularly with the changes for paid parental leave. These are really important shifts. And labour participation trends alongside significant demographic change, including ageing of the population and a strong national commitment to a migrant workforce, means that we urgently need to address the fractures, tensions and contradictions that are currently shape our work and care arrangements. So how to address the current state of play? In our work, we advocate a new social contract, one that will deliver a gender equitable future of work and care. So, as many of you will know, the social contract refers to the reciprocal relationship between the state and its citizens and can be defined as the policies and norms that regulate and govern how we live together or what we owe each other. In our work, we argue that a new social contract is required in order to deliver the aim of everyone having the right to give and to receive high quality care. So I'm not going to elaborate now on what drives the current social contract and why it's broken, but I'm going to focus on the new policy architecture that's required to build this new social contract. That is one that embeds a future-orientated, long-term approach in which care is understood as essential to sustained well-being and prosperity and is grounded in substantive gender equality, where both men and women have the right to give and the right to receive care. We argue that a new social contract of this variety could transform care labour from an individualised risk borne primarily by women into a social good that is recognised, redistributed and rewarded. And this would also shift the way in which care is delivered and the value placed on care and provide more attention to the care workforce. So in order to achieve these outcomes, the new social contract must have gender at its centre and properly support the interconnections between work and care across society and the economy. So everyone, as we all know, at some stage of their life requires care, and most of us are required to provide care. But for generations, the social contract has assumed that it's women who are primarily responsible for care, with most of it supplied for free or at very low wages. And that has always historically posed a great financial and personal cost to women. This, of course, is no longer acceptable, and it's not even desirable. Post-pandemic labour markets mean that labour is in high demand and women's unemployment is at historic lows. Our research also shows that young men and women's expectations about combining work and care are creating new challenges for employers and for government policy to widen eligibility and promote policies that support shared and equitable opportunities for care. But not only does a new social contract need gender analysis at its centre, it also needs to consider the right to give and the right to receive care across the entire life course. The giving and receiving of care, as we all know, is not limited to the birth of a young child or to the end of life. It's a daily, essential requirement that ebbs and flows over the life course. It's dynamic, and we need a policy architecture and care systems that reflect this dynamism of need. Australia's current policy architecture is not seamless and it is not joined up. Instead, it has many breaks and schisms. breaks and schisms between conception, birth and baby and infant care, between the return to work and the availability of care for young children, between hours of work and school terms and timings, and between career progression and the demands of elder care, amongst other things. This fragmentation is also reflected in the work and care research, which is mostly focused on one moment in the life cycle, such as the birth of a new child or a particular sector of the care economy, such as aged care or early childhood education and care. So to build a gender equitable future of care and work, we need to shift the frame to include the whole life course and the policies and care services that support workers and families from birth and even before, right through to school, aging, illness, disability, and to the end of life. A life course approach to policy development will acknowledge the embeddedness of care in work and will catalyse the development of a comprehensive policy framework that meets the needs of all people at each point in life where care needs become most acute for them. Now, if Australia can get the policy settings right, the benefits for families, the benefits for workers, for employers and governments will be immense, with worker well-being, gender equality, productivity and economic security significantly enhanced. And there are so many opportunities available for improvement. I'm going to run through 6 critical areas, although there are many more, including our industrial relations system, where we are seeing some significant changes to support a better work care system. Not perfect, but better. So I'm going to talk through these 6 areas briefly. You can see that they're being presented in a life course kind of logic. So starting with workplace reproductive policies. Now, this is an evolving and innovative policy space that you may not have heard of or certainly thought of in terms of the work care debate. But it's an area of work for me, for my colleague, Professor Marion Baird, and our associate, Sydney Calusi, that we've been doing a lot of work on over the past 6 years and are currently, and we're currently pulling together into a book for Princeton University Press. So it's a policy area with an enormous amount of global interest, and that interest is not just in rich countries, it's in rich countries, high-income countries, middle and low-income economies. And it's also being shown a lot of interest by governments, by unions and employers. Policies in this domain pay attention to the embodied nature of workers and their reproductive capacity and needs. In an era of fertility challenges and a context of rising rates of women's participation in paid work across the entire life cycle, this has become a really exciting and interesting and challenging emergent area of policy work. Policies focus on the material reality of the body, and in doing so, push back against that orthodox idea of the ideal worker. That is an autonomous worker, perennially available for work, with no care responsibilities or a body with its own needs. And we think about how workplaces might challenge that, acknowledge the material reality of bodies, particularly around their reproductive capacities, and think about how workplace policies might accommodate the body at work. Now, this is a really hotly contested policy domain that has feminist scholars and activists at loggerheads in terms of whether this is a policy area that will support women's economic security or severely limit it. Policies in this domain tend to focus on paid leave, workplace adjustments, and flexible working arrangements to accommodate reproductive health concerns and interventions such as fertility treatments, pregnancy loss, vasectomy, menstrual and menopause symptoms. There's a lot more to be said about that, but I'll just leave that there. The second policy area I'll comment on is, of course, parental leave. Gender equal paid parental leave is essential to a new social contract that supports the right for men, along with women, to care and be cared for. We're seeing a global move towards gender neutral paid parental leave, and there's a lot of scholarship around how to design paid parental leave to be gender neutral, including debates around reserved periods of leave for both parents. In Australia, recent changes to the PPL Act has both legislated an increase in the length of PPL up to 26 weeks by July 2026, but also a change in the design that includes reserved periods of leave for both parents, no matter what family type, and capacity to take 2 weeks of concurrent leave. That is, parents both on leave at the same time. It also includes new flexibility arrangements, so the rest of the leave can be used by either parent in a fully flexible manner until the child turns 2 years old. The design supports shared care, but at 26 weeks, it is not long enough to support a genuine opportunity to share care between parents. In research I did with Professor Marion Baird to inform the new legislation and policy design, we found that Australian parents prioritise maternal and child health and wellbeing over aspirations for shared care. Paid parental leave is a complex policy trying to meet multiple policy objectives, including maternal and child health, gender equality, shared care, women's workforce participation. But no matter how good the design is, these policy objectives cannot all be filled in a 26-week envelope. Paid parental leave needs to be at least 52 weeks before Australian families will be truly free to choose to share the care of young children equally, while also meeting their expectations around maternal and child wellbeing. And the 52-week level would put us much further up the international kind of league table. That's kind of where the global standard is. So Australian policy design is now heading in the right direction, with superannuation added to PPL earlier this year. But there's a lot more to be done in terms of pay rate and total length. 26 weeks is not enough to meet all our policy objectives and support all aspects of gender equality at this intensive caring moment. The third policy domain is early childhood education and care, or ECEC. There is so much going on in this space. The current government priority to work towards a universal system of ECEC would meet the demands of a new social and gender contract. But whether or not government is able to find a way forward in response to the many recommendations of the recent ACCC and upcoming Productivity Commission report to take the measures that will build towards universal provision of what is an essential service and a public good, well, let's wait and see. What we do know is that the current ECEC system is broken. It does not deliver affordable, high quality and accessible care for all. It does deliver that for some. It's been marketised and financialised. It's now dominated by for-profit providers who make massive profits, which in turn incentivise a range of new lender types looking to bank on the rivers of gold that the childcare benefit is, and the increasing underlying value of the land and property on which the centres stand. The workforce is in crisis, and many kids who stand to benefit the most from high-quality ECEC are those that are most unable or least likely to access the service. So what we know is that change in this sector will be very hard to make, but it is a critical plank in building a gender equal future of work and care. And there's so much more to be said on that. Policy area 4 is around flexible working. And by this, I'm talking about good flex, not bad flex. So I'll get to that. So flexible work of all kinds has become quite a standard expectation of many workers in post-pandemic Australia, but not all flexible work is equal, and some of you will know that. And what do we mean by flexibility anyway? Is it around the timing? Is it around the location, or is it around the contract type? Notions of a standard working week and day dominate the organisation of work and the social contract built around it. But this logic of work does not align well with care demands, needs or the care workforce. So flexible working, both time and location, can support a new gender equal future of work and care, but only and only if it's what my colleague, Professor Ray Cooper, calls good flex. That is, flexible working that is secure, that's predictable, that supports career progression, that leverages formal qualifications, that pays professional wages, and includes supports for care. So that a flexible work contract that includes access to parental leave and carers leave, for example. But most importantly, the most important feature, I guess, of good flex is that it's mutually beneficial for both the employee and the employer, not just the employer, which is the case with so much flex work at the moment. So we're talking about flexible working in good jobs that do not attract an economic penalty because they're flexible. And if we can get to a wider provision of good flexible working, this will support men moving away from long hours jobs to potentially share care more equitably. Then we get to the area of policy, which is broad around carers. Carers are an important and often overlooked group that policy needs to better include. A new social contract will only support a gender equitable future of work and care if it recognises and rewards the unpaid work of carers and their right to work and their right to be cared for themselves. Carers of family with disability, chronic illness, and the elderly pay a huge economic cost for the valuable care work they provide outside the market and often in the home. Whereas most of us need policy support to provide paid time away from work in order to care, those with significant carer duties need time away from care to support paid employment and self-care. This is a critical component of a new social contract that centres care and the right for all to give and receive that care. And this is the most underdeveloped part of Australia's work and care policy architecture, and one that requires a lot more attention and resources. It's crucial to opening up opportunities for women's future of work and their economic security when they are carers. And finally, there's the very important question of income and expenditure, known as the tax and transfer system, and its implications for gender inequality in the distribution of work and care. Now, I'm not going to explain the mechanics of effective marginal tax rates that crush women as they move between care and work, or the other inequitable impacts of the tax and transfer system on household decisions about who works and who cares when they do that and how much. For those of you who are interested, I'll point you in the direction of Miranda Stewart's work. But what I will say is that a gender equal future of work and care will require gendered assumptions that are embedded deeply in our current tax and transfer laws and our systems to be unpicked and to be made gender neutral. That will support a new social contract, and it will reduce the economic penalty Australian women face as a result of the current uneven distribution of work and care across the life course. And I will stop there, only to say that all these kinds of ideas are further developed in the book I was referring to, At a Turning Point. So that's an edited volume, and the chapters in there track those 6 points. And you will, if you are interested, it's leading Australian scholars who have written on each of those topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. So, on computer? Yeah. Okay, all right. But if you need to get a coffee and then morning tea, you can grab some food from there. And would you guys mind come and sit in the front row? It looks really weird. Most people are sitting behind. Hi, how are you? Yeah, thanks. 10 minutes? I'll give you like 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. 2 minutes. Yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. Okay? I love meeting you. We'll chat during the coffee break. Yeah. I emailed you a couple of times. Yeah. How are you?
press you because like.
You can tell me Lotta, that's fine, that's not my family name. I say Lotta, it's better because people, it's easier for it's so good.
I like to share it. You can share.
Yeah. You can see your slides. How long have you been in Australia? You're not from Australia,
Oh,
right?
no. I've been in Australia for I know my first time in Kenya.
Oh, so you
Because I don't know if it'll be online.
if you can see the full screen, the full screen comes there, so when you did that, it's coming there. Oh, that's nice.
That's the border story.
Yeah,
I've
okay.
been in Europe the last 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're kind of European already. But,
Yeah, good. I mean, for finance,
how old is your daughter? Well, okay, my son is 5. Yeah, you should have together.
and I have, I studied there, so I was there, but but still I continue. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Sorry, June guys, we can't offer you tea or coffee, but yeah, we'll start in like 2 minutes. Yeah, our next session.
And the more I dive
Yes. I'll just, once, I'll make this. Yeah.
I think this is next
What did you should come to all events. No, yeah. Especially your peers. It's like the fine.
And I said to everyone, I'm saying what you said, I'm saying no.
We haven't made, I'm Lotta. Sorry, no, Lotta.
Jenny. Nice to meet you. Yes, I came from Mexico.
No worries. Are you from our school or?
No, I'm from Mexico.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Lovely meeting you.
Everybody always the same. It just happens. Hi, how are you, Deborah? Good to see you. Yeah. How it's going?
Still going, the feed work.
Yeah. But it still does the job. Running from one thing to the next and wrapping up one thing and starting the next. Yeah, I just turned 9. And yeah.
Everyone, can you please take your seat?
Yeah. Yeah, they have their own lives.
All right, maybe we start and then sorry to interrupt your conversation. So for speakers, you have 10 minutes time, and yeah, we will get questions at the end of the session. So yeah, and we'll record the presentations, but not question and answers. So we are going to start with Deborah. And Deborah, how do you say your last name? Lanzani. Okay. So yeah, Dr. Deborah Lanzani. She's from Monash University, and she's part of the ADMS Center, Automated Decision Making and Society.
Yeah, and I work in the ET lab.
Yeah, she's working. Yeah, she could tell more about herself, so I'll leave it to her. But let's welcome. Are we recording? Asma, are we recording? Yes. All right. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Let's welcome Deborah.
I'm happy to be here. As I said, I work in the ET lab, which is the Emerging Technology Research Lab at Monash, and I'm an anthropologist with a PhD in STS. I just came to Australia 1.5 years ago. So I did most of my career in Europe. And I have a daughter, like less than 4 years. I feel I need to say this after the Elizabeth presentation. We have children, right? Most of them. What I will be talking about fieldwork we are doing now, I'm sharing, we are in the middle of the project and in the middle of the fieldwork. So it's kind of like a raw thing I want to share. And as I said, I'm coming from the tech side. I have been working with tech designers and for emerging tech in different systems. Is my first contact with care, not as concept, but as process of concern in the work I do, in the fieldwork. And I will be talking today about healthcare workers' perspective in tech, work in future hospitals, particularly about the fieldwork I'm doing and the concept of insights coming from our fieldwork in Bendigo Hospital. These 3 pictures are actually one landscape that Bendigo has in the entrance of the hospital and in the website. And I decided to go with this picture because for me, it's like talk about what implies healthcare in rural Victoria. I'm extending to the other hospital. Bendigo is the biggest hospital in rural Victoria, so it's kind of the hospital. And as you can see, like professionalism, like gender gap between the manager and the care workers, like community, but for the workers as well, the workers are part of the community. And also a thing that I think is central for the whole presentation and to understand Bendigo is like, it's a mobile community. They need to cover the major territory in Australia. So they moved to where people live because most people are not able to come to the hospital depending what they come, they move. They has been for decades like this, since the hospital was starting. So it's a kind of like a very particular hospital setting, and they acknowledge that conscious and unconsciously. And I think the picture talk about it. That's what I decided to go for this picture. The project I'm talking from today is called Order Work, and it's funded by the Norwegian Research Council and the European Commission, European Union through the European Commission. And it's a 5-year project trying to understand how workers engage with transition for digitalization, robotization, automation in 3 industries, construction, sale, and healthcare. I'm the CI for healthcare in Australia, and we have a CI for healthcare in Norway. What we are trying to do is understand how are the visions of future for the health workers about the future of work, their own careers, the work in general, and whatever emerge in that zone. For this project, we have two methodological parts. One is the ethnographic future workshops, another is the ethnography fieldwork. And what we're trying to do with this is not just understand what the future could be, should be, and the possibles, but also what they have to say about what they mean by the possible future for healthcare. And as I said, I'm doing fieldwork in Bendigo Hospital, and we are doing the workshops with professional clinicians from Bendigo and other communities inside of the hospital life, and also with experts from other hospitals like Alfred Hospital and Monash Victoria. And this is the communities we identify as part of the process of concern of tech in the hospital, which is the clinicians, the admin and health information services, digital service, open office, corporate and non-clinical teams. I know if you're not in contact with hospital, it sounds like I didn't know any of this. I mean, so clinicians and I imagine admin, but the rest is kind of that. They are quite important in the hospital and for the process. Particularly digital service because it's what is in charge of this transformation. Why futures? And I go quick with this because it's 10 minutes presentation. And if you want to know more, you can ask me. But I think one of the things that we are trying to change is the orientation to future in terms, not in three levels. One is understanding what we can do to achieve, for example, gender equality, or what is the movement we need to do. Others understand how these ideas of future unfold in the tech and caring processes in the healthcare. Another, which I think is the most important, is through which technologies, and technologies as concept, not technologies as piece of device. 4 minutes, okay. 5 futures. That is oriented to what is to come and what we can do to that, not as a temporary, but a practice process. So what we do for the ethnography, we follow this device to start as ethnographic device in one sense to have a technology that can relate with what you do every day, but also because they ask us to follow this, because they are in the moment of installing this, which is an automated cabinet for medicine. And one of the questions that was posed by us, and it was immediately answered by them, is at what extent workers are involved in imagining the possibilities of this particular device, how they are engaged with the process of developing, deploying, and interacting with it. And then we engage with the training of super users, which will be in each word, the one that will help most workers working with. And also we learned that it's one of the most sensitive process in the hospital, the medication. So it really is at the core of what they do. And I will go quick on this. So the thing is, one of the things that emerged, and I will connect this with the insights that are to come, is that what the nurses particularly, because the people that interact most with this device are nurses and midwives. It's people practicing everyday care of the patients. They come to us with the counterintuitive thing from somebody that's coming from technology, which is they believe this device rely on them to do their work, not them relying on the device, which is kind of the opposite of it you can see in other industries. And I'm going super quick. But that's in the workshops and in the ethnography. This is a pharmacy robot. This is actually what a healthcare robot looks, an actual one in the pharmacy in Bendigo. Three things that came as insight in the ethnography and in the workshop that I want to share. So I guess understanding the technology as something that supplements their work, which is against most of the literature and automation where supposed workers understood this as something that comes or to replace or to enhance or to. And there was a huge question, where's this supplement coming? Because everybody was talking about supplements. And then we realized that most of the media, brochures, and everything that have been given to them, not to them particularly, but to the ones training them, it's called like the AI is coming to supplement your work. So it's actually the response to these topic scenarios of technology. And particularly the idea of like being a supplement in the human error. I will be super quick with us, but we can with it. And one of the things that was also interesting with the supplement is, on the other hand, when they talk about technology, or when they explain how was this everyday with technology, they say technology, they always appear this idea of like the worst thing that could happen is losing the tech we have and coming back to paper. So technology is something that is, I'm talking technology as a huge concept, but what I mean is the devices and software and Epic and everything that the hospital runs on in tech. It's part of something that for them is the current situation, or like a supplement for what they do. We can come back later to this, but I got to care because I don't have time. But what we learned from care until now, and again, we are like doing. Too loud. Okay. Can appear in several ways in the interviews, in the everyday and in the workshops, but mainly appear as in two formats, care and caring. And when it appears as care, it's always in a storytelling that explains why they are there, what they do, what is important, and what technology could help to do or not help to do. But when they talk about caring, actually they talk about what they do. And it's interesting because caring is always compartmented in different processes. And it's never in the job description or something that is part of what they do, but it's always rooted in something they do and is like provided a service of. And it intervene differently when they talk about their careers and expectations. But in general, it's a mobile concept that appear like as part of the service, but also as ultimate value and justification of whatever could come, which is what opened the door to automation, basically. Is if automation will supplement us for care, for delivering care, is fine. But when the automation appears intertwined with the caring processes, it's actually very annoying. Which is something that we are like trying to.
You have 1 minute, Deborah.
Okay, going to automation. There's a huge ascending idea of the challenge of automation. And I think Elizabeth was mentioned this, an overview of this, but there's a huge common sense, sociological common sense of automation, that the challenge of applying a good automation for the human, for the well-being, is the culture within the organization. So you need to put things on a way that helps technology to be deployed, that help technology to make sense of what happened. That is almost impossible in most of the organization, but particularly in healthcare, because care is a process that is not actually rooted in certain practice, in certain sets of ideas, is compartmented in different aspects of the everyday life of the workspace and also of the workplace. And I will pass the provider again because I didn't. But I think what I want to share today is like, if we don't understand, at least talking about embracing technology, if we don't understand what are the values, not of the organization, but the practices and process that they engage every day and entangle with technology, it's quite difficult to move forward to any possibility of thinking differently in the future about that, what is embedded in the tech we receive, which is a very basic thing in STS, but actually nobody talk about the processual aspects of the providers in the, or within the culture. So yeah, that's mainly what I wanted to share. Prepared 15 minutes. I was sorry.
There it is. That's including question and answer. You should have tried. All right, thank you so much, Deborah. So our next speaker is Professor Ilan Weisel. And Ilan is going to talk about telecommuting. Ilan is going to present on telecommuting and the future of care work. Lessons from COVID-19 Western Sydney. We find Ilan's presentation. Okay.
Great, thanks, Lasha.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Ilan. I work here at the university at the School of Geography, Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. I'm an urban geographer, and I'm presenting on behalf of the team. You can see the names here: Emma Mitchell, Kathy Me, and Emma Power. I'll talk about the project that we're working on together on shadow care infrastructures. And I really want to also give credit to Emma Mitchell, because this presentation is based on a paper that actually Emma Mitchell primarily worked on, and is the lead author, which is currently under review. So telecommuting, or working from home, as we all know it, it's a massive topic. I thought I'll come today, and I thought I'll spend a couple of days doing a literature review for today, and then I saw the massive amount of literature that's already out there on telecommuting. But I guess the question is it really the future of work? We know it will be part of it, but not the whole thing for sure. The question is, how effectively can and already is telecommuting applied to care work? And we're going to speak about some lessons from Western Sydney's experience of COVID-19, lockdowns, having to provide social care from distance using Zoom and Teams and all those tele options. So it forced a shift from face-to-face to remote forms of caregiving, and almost coincidentally, we didn't plan it to be the topic of our study, but COVID happened and it became very central to our work. So as I mentioned, there's a whole lot of literature on telecommuting, working from home. It started well before COVID, but COVID sort of really pumped it. There's literature on the drivers, the prevalence, workers' experience, employers' perspectives, the spatial, social outcomes. There is a bit of literature on, not a bit, there's a lot of literature on care. A lot of it is focused on telehealth, so healthcare, and how healthcare works remotely. Some of it, in addition to all those other themes that I've mentioned, the telehealth literature is interested in the clinical outcomes. So there's some measures there to measure effectiveness, and the results are mixed, I have to say. Good outcomes, bad outcomes, and depends for who, where, what kind of health issues, etc. There's some literature, probably not as much, on social care, which is what we were interested in. And a lot of it is interested in the job satisfaction of care workers providing social care at a distance, remotely, but also inequalities in access and in outcomes of receiving care at a distance. So what we've got really contributes to that sort of literature on telecommuting in social care. The project is an ARC discovery on shadow care infrastructures. We were really interested in, I don't have enough time to go into the whole theory that we were using. I'll just say that we take a care ethics, a feminist care ethics to approach drawing on Toronto, and others, thinking about care as a situated relational ethic. We take an infrastructural lens to think about care, and we talk about care infrastructures. To know that care is about relations, but there are all kinds of infrastructures in place that enable, that facilitate care, and that mediate relations of care. So we're interested in those infrastructures, and services, social services, are part of that network of infrastructures of care. We based our study in Western Sydney, an area with high levels of poverty and many people living on very low incomes, primarily income support recipients, job seeker, disability support pensions, and asylum seeker support pensions. So we were particularly interested in those groups, recipients of those income support, or people who receive no income, neither from work or income support. And we wanted to see very, very simply, how do they survive? How could you survive with such low income when we know costs of living are far higher? So the answer, we kind of know what the answer is there's all these informal and formal care infrastructures that enable survival. And we were trying to map all those care infrastructures in one region in Western Sydney. And then lockdown happened. We got the funding in 2019 and then started fieldwork in 2020, and it was all done on Zoom, and it was all about lockdowns and doing that care work that we were interested in, doing it remotely. So it was really interesting to learn what happens to care when it's done remotely. So in the remaining time, I'll just read you some quotes, and you'll see, I guess I think it's pretty straightforward from there. So care, I mean, what's really interesting about care, there's material aspects of care, but it's also emotional, affective. There's all, with Toronto, things about the different phases of care, from caring for, caring about, caregiving, caring with. So there's all those different elements. And I think especially the emotional, the relational elements of care, what does doing it remotely, how does it change it? And that came a lot through our interviews, and I'll only bring quotes from our interviews with care providers, although the study also included a lot of interviews with care recipients. So here's one quote. The main thing, hearing the story, just having to say, just warning you, it could be weeks. So this is they're talking about warning people that it could be weeks until they get the support they need. It could be food deliveries or some other kind of financial or support. But it's how do you reassure them that you're there, that you're caring, that relation element. It's easier face to face. You can at least give them a cup of coffee or something before you send them off. It's really hard on the telephone. So it already gives you a sense of the kinds of challenges that the workers were facing in maintaining that caring relation remotely. A few more quotes on the same theme. Face to face, it's easier for the client to see you, to get to know you, to trust you. So how do you build that trust remotely? How meaningful can it be? Because a big part of what we do is having those connections, building relationships. And I personally find it hard over the phone. There was a lot about building those relations with care recipients. But care, and I think this is what one of our big kind of findings around care infrastructures is that the people providing care also need to be cared for. And a lot of that care happens in the office environment or in the workplace, where supervisors and peers kind of care for each other. And that was gone because people were working from home. So one of the supervisors I tried to stay in touch with my workers, with all of them. Lots of emailing just so that they can hear from me. Tried to create a system of I'm calling everyone once a month just to say hello. But I felt that they all thought that was weird. Why are you calling me? So something that would have been quite natural in the office, in the workplace, becomes weird and unnatural, and people lose that support environment around them. It's done at home. You've all experienced that, I'm sure. What it's like to work from home with, could be kids around, could be a pet, could be other sorts of things. And that really impacted people's ability to provide care for others with Zooms. And it's both the provider of care working from home and the recipient's care receiving that care at home, and seeing each other's homes on Zoom really changed that relationship. Sometimes for better, sometimes it created intimacy where people felt they saw people at their home and they kind of got some more context about their lives. And sometimes it made it harder. It was just harder to have a conversation without someone being distracted by everything around them. It was interesting, this quote I found really interesting, how Zoom was kind of a mediator, because they were saying, I think there's a quote here, on Zoom, everyone's on their best behavior. They can see themselves on Zoom. You see yourself in the camera, and it shapes how you present yourself. Whereas they felt that face-to-face, it's a little bit more natural. So the quote then goes into something that you can kind of think about it more critically. They're saying if you've got a really challenging issue, you have to press a client, potentially evasive client. You can press them a little bit more if you're doing it face-to-face. It's a bit harder on Zoom. So there's some issues there about the kind of governmentality of care recipients and the sort of control elements that come with receiving care, providing and receiving care. So there's interesting questions of how Zoom telecommuting mediates all of that. But I think I mentioned that for many participants, they said it was hard, they said it was difficult, but they also saw opportunities there. They really saw value as well. It was a challenge, but it's good experience for us. We learn new things. I never thought I could work from home, and now we do it. We're keeping up even after COVID. We're still doing a lot of it remotely. We realized we can help people much more efficiently online. We can help more people, basically. We still have the ability to ask people to come to the office when needed. So sometimes they will choose some people to bring to the office, but many other clients, they can sort of triage it online. So it's a little bit more efficient from their perspective. So participants, I guess the findings highlights the importance of considering how distance and proximity, physical distance and proximity are built into care relations and care infrastructures. There are a lot of challenges in doing care work, social care remotely, the technologies that mediates physical distance, and that home environment where both recipients and providers of care are placed in. But there's also opportunities that come with it. And I think we're in the very, very early stages of this quite significant change in society. So it will all evolve. I think I'm done with my time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elon. Great paper. And Elon was kind of very generous. He and Emma, their team wrote a lot of papers on infrastructure of care and care stuff. So if you're interested, yeah, you can check those literatures. Thank you. Our next presenter is our next presenter. Oh, Chanel, yeah. Chanel and Shiri, yeah. Shiri is online, right? Shiri? Yeah, I can see them both. Yeah, no.
Hi.
She is my co-convener. She could introduce herself. And hi, Chanel. Yeah, so they are going to present on care technology, work and life boundary and time field. So that really goes well with Elon's paper. So, Shiri, do you want to share your screen? Oh, I have to stop sharing here. All right, you can share now, Shiri.
Great. Can you see? I think Sunil has shared the slides. So our paper is entitled Technology, Care Boundaries and the Time Field Between Work and Life. It's a conceptual paper, and we're thinking about measures of care. My name is Cherie Gregory. I'm from Western Sydney University in the Human Resources and Management program, and I'll let my colleague Sunil introduce himself in a moment. So just, Sunil, can you move to the next slide?
There we go.
Thank you. So in terms of imagining the future of work and care, the direction there in the title, life work interventions, the slash is deliberate. So thinking about putting life, care, family before work. So it's that way to suggest going against the grain, resisting and subverting dominant logics of time and organising of resources around paid work in the labour market. Our paper is entering a field of debate around life and work balance, conflict, juggle, the intersection, or also known as work-life blend, and the blurriness between paid work, unpaid work, leisure, time for self. And these debates about the slash kind of hark back to the start of the 21st century and work by sociologists, thinking about Michael Bittman on time use studies, leisure, paid work and employment, and unpaid domestic work. So we're not trying to move away from work-life balance as such or the bind, but we're just envisioning the future of work and care will emphasize care and life, those non-labour market constructs and practices, and we're just trying to reorientate them in our conceptualization.
Great. So my contribution to this comes from some work that Cherie and I have been doing for almost 5 years now, mostly conceptual and theoretical work with the aim to take that into a kind of bigger empirical study. But on picking up on the slash between life and work, some of the work I've been doing has looked at technologies that sit at that boundary and make the boundary between life and work and leisure and so on kind of porous and confusing. And this object that you're seeing on the screen is a real product. It took me a long time to figure out if it was a hoax or not, but it is a real product. It's made by the kind of elite, watch manufacturer Hubolt. And it's a device that allows you to privatize time. And it has 3 modalities of measuring and quantifying time. One allows you to slow down time, and it allows you to sort of do time on your own terms as an intervention against clock time or work time. So I thought that this sort of object is a kind of interesting embodiment of the kind of luxury of being able to privatize time, and the luxury of being able to sort of strategically manage the concept of time and the feel of time. I use this quote a lot in my work, and it comes from Daisy Hildyard's really excellent book called The Second Body. And I have this quote from that text, and it reads, "Being beside yourself, failing to be true to yourself, hearing other voices, or splitting your personality. It doesn't sound good. This careful language is anxious. You need to take care of yourself. It says you need boundaries. You have to be either here or there. Don't be all over the place." And in Hildyard's sort of account of the body, she asserts that all human beings have 2 bodies, one physical, governed by the sort of, the anatomy and the physiology, and one diffuse, existing in different times and places, embedded in an ecosystem that extends beyond the physical. And for Hildyard, this extends, to images of oneself and dead skin cells and so on. And we thought that sort of idea of the body being sort of, distributed and existing in different forms and traces translates well to the spatio-temporal dimensions of care across the porous work-life boundary and the kind of multiplicity of conceptions of self.
So our reimagining of the future of care, it has to account for this new attention also that's currently happening in the literature. So for example, Caitlin Collins' work from 2019 around the crisis of care, ideas around care and support, how they're changing, and the contradictions around them, and the struggle to balance paid work and caring and parenting, which visibly emerged during COVID-19. Also being informed around the intersections and regimes of work that have been disrupted by COVID, and finding time for work and care during lockdown. So thinking about care as being a gendered experience as well, and the literature around the costs and consequences of caring, the invisible labour, care penalties and inequalities. And the impact of technology on work and life during COVID, and moving all of work online, which is still quite an important occurrence, and the tensions that are faced by workers in a changing employment environment. Just the next slide, Sunil. So in our argument about the future of work and care, we make the point that time, dominant logics, and in relation to care should be unpacked further. Thanks for the timekeeping. So, for example, we use the concept of time field that captures the subjective relationship between time for care and the bleed between the boundaries of sectioning out time for care, time for self, time for rejuvenation, and thinking about the productivity apps that make you breathe, for example, and Mel Gregg's work around work's intimacy and online changes, and to kind of encapsulate this presence bleed. So very much also trying to think about the anxieties of time and the self as well. And I think just in terms of time, Sunil, do you want to move on to the typology?
Sure. So over the next 2 slides, what we want to talk about is some work that we've been doing around developing frameworks that allow us to understand and make sense of empirical qualitative data that comes out of studies of the time feel of work-life balance and the time feel of care. So this first table starts to set up some ideas around what one might look for in a corpus of qualitative data. So unspoken, passed on through, ideas of work ethic that are unspoken, passed on through generations by gender roles, through norms, and established within certain professions and life stages. Those of us who are, sort of academics would sort of know that. Ideas that shape norms and values of groups, things like families and workplaces and so on. Socialized ideas of productivity and self-care. So shared ideas, norms, and discursive constructs of care for self and others. Tangible but partial expressions of ethics towards work and leisure. Media representations. And then looking for internalized representations and perceptions that are experiential or unconscious around the way that people situate and structure care within their own life worlds. So loose ideas, more like a set of flags of things that one might look for, and one might start to kind of develop up particular codes for looking at data from empirical studies. And then this second framework comes from work that Sheree and I've been doing for quite some time around the idea of how time presents itself within a sort of logic of conceptualizing care. So looking at the past, present, and future conceptions of self within the context of care. And in the interest of time, I won't go through all of this, but I'll leave it up on the screen for people to look at. But looking at the logic through which people conceptualize their notions of self, the focus of technology in mediating spatial and temporal boundaries. So going back to the sort of, the watch that we showed earlier, the method of self-analysis, the mechanisms of self-correction when one sort of deviates from notions of responsibility and care, and the relation between behavior and the body. So that sort of cause and effect notion of care. I think that's it. We're done.
Thank you so much. Wonderful papers, everyone. So we'll get questions now. Before that, Asma, can.
Yeah, all right. The floor is yours, Stephanie.
Thanks, and thank you for the introduction. So just reflecting on the previous presentations, mine focusing on caring in the context of housing instability is probably a little bit more low tech than what we've seen before on the role of technology in IN hospitals. It doesn't mean that it's irrelevant, but my focus in this presentation, rather on technologies, is more on the relationality of care. So before I start, I also wanted to acknowledge that when unceded land, and that the research study was conducted on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people. Now, just very quickly, because I only have 10 minutes, the background to this project in general was a public health problem, and that problem is mainly articulated as one of health-seeking behaviors, of overutilization of acute care resources, and challenges to providing primary health care to people who are either homeless or who have exited homelessness or experience various degrees of housing instability. So in other words, if we rephrase that sociologically as a matter of care, we see care either not being done or care being done wrong. So where this study is coming in is trying to look at it through a different lens and trace and make visible the kind of things that people do when they are in the experiences of extreme poverty and extreme social disadvantage, and the kind of things they actually do to look after themselves and others. So the setting for the study for the ethnography was an inclusive healthcare center that is explicitly aiming to deliver healthcare to people who are in these circumstances and who have a mission of being inclusive and to addressing health and social care in an integrated fashion. And interestingly, they provide also services that usually would more commonly expect in the context of more mainstream settings or settings that aim at middle class and higher class people. So in the terms of conceptual framing, then to continue with that point of departure in the public health literature, we're looking at a theoretical framing that allows us to move beyond how we access health care towards one that emphasizes enactment and that care is located diffusely across different levels in society. That includes individual actors, that includes social organization, and also institutions and the norms and values that inform them. I was going here with the work of Annemarie Mohl, and in particular, the idea that we are doing care and that we're experiencing health in situations of choice. That means that we're shifting the focus from individual responsibilization towards a more collective understanding and how we're doing health. The research questions for the study that I was going into the field with were then, what does health mean for people at risk of or who are experiencing homelessness? And how do people care for themselves and others in their everyday practices on the margins of society? And what became clear pretty quickly for me in the study, so I'm not coming from a housing background, and this was relatively new for me and I had to adapt to the context. And what was becoming quite challenging for me at the beginning was how to I just even articulate what the issue is. So when we are looking at housing, homelessness, and housing instability, there's vastly different definitions, and depending on how you shift the definition, a different bucket will be applied to a person, and they will be labeled differently. But that doesn't really accurately reflect the circumstances of people, because even in the study period, which was around about a year, they just keep moving around from one housing status to another. And this is a quite fluid conceptual flexibility that we need to apply to this context. So for me then, I prefer the term housing instability or being unstably housed, because we can trace then movement across different forms of shelter organizations and also the different affordances of these different contexts for human and non-human capacities to care. It also allows us to think more diffuse around how these movements occur. So rather than following a pathway from somebody experiencing homelessness into housing, or from somebody experiencing ill health into a context of good health, it's more conducive here to think of care assemblages to do justice to the dynamic relationships between these different kind of levels in society. Now, just very quickly on the methods and what I've done together with the larger research team. We done ethnographic work that included observations of care encounters during assertive outreach, so with people who are on the streets. It included observations within an inclusive care setting, the one I introduced earlier, where I spent lots of time sitting around just in a waiting room, looking what's going on and tuning into how it feels to be in that space. And also observations of clinical consultations, minor treatments, and so on. I also conducted interviews with the people who provide care in these settings and those people who make use of these settings to receive the care that they need. So in this particular talk today, I will just look at the interviews I've conducted with people who have experienced housing instability. And it also includes and that's where the photographs you'll see later come from, a prompt to produce photographs that show the meanings of health and that show what health looks and feels like when you are experiencing housing instability. So people were given this prompt and the camera, and they returned with photographs that I then discussed with them and traced again, they kind of encourage the same kind of storytelling around meanings of health and health practices. So just to ease you into what is going on, and obviously, I think considering who we all are in our areas of work, it shouldn't surprise you that people do care. They do care about their health, and they do things to look after themselves, no matter how bad the housing status or housing setting is. So just to give you an overview of the different kind of typologies I saw of doing this kind of care, it can be anything from motivational messaging and crisis accommodation on a whiteboard, or this assembly of instruments here that a person who had a spinal cord injury used as a type of manual therapy to just take apart these devices, put them back together as a way to regain some dexterity in their hands. We have journaling here as a kind of self-care practice to look after to deal with trauma, for example. And we also have these kind of indicators of more wellness and well-being oriented practices like yoga, or this bowl here, for example, is used for a sound bath. So really interesting spiritual self-care practices as well that we normally really assign to people who we would locate more in the middle class surging movement around wellness and well-being. Interesting for me on the side of the screen is a quote from Arundhati Roy, which brings back basically the focus of my original research project and where it started, because it really situates care as a collective effort and as a collective responsibility. So this person who was in permanent supportive housing actually has that on their wall as a reminder and as something to motivate themselves and as something that expresses how they feel about how societies should work together. So in a nutshell, meanings of health are really not that, thank you, are really not that different than what you would expect, because we all at the end of the day live in the same society, informed by same values and very similar beliefs. So this participant took a photograph of something they do outdoors. They pile these rocks as a form of meditative practice. And they commented that for them, health means balance. You have to take the good with the bad and balance body, mind, and spirit as much as you can. And that is precarious, and especially if you consider the context of being only precariously housed or having that experience of being homeless. And that doesn't mean that people completely rejected more biomedical understandings of health and healthcare. So this person, for example, took a photograph of her medications, and that was an interesting one for me, because when we talk about medication in the context of mental health, as sociologists, we're immediately quite suspicious of, is this being pushed on people? Is this a kind of type of social control? But this person actually saw this as part of their cycle of health, being able to care about yourself enough to get yourself to move physically out of the house to get those when you are experiencing a mental health crisis. So I don't want to, and that's an important point as well. I also want to shy away from romanticizing the self-care practices and how people look after others in this context, because by and large, the experience of extreme poverty and housing instability is also the experience of violence. And all of the people in the study acknowledge that they engaged in practices that would be deemed undesirable or that are morally condemned in our usual normative understanding of how things should work. But at the same time, they could also be very, very dedicated to self-care practices and to looking after their good health. So I'm trying to grapple with these contradictions. And because I just got a heads up that I'm out of time, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit and give you the example of how this caring also extends into other living things and non-human others. So this is in crisis accommodation. And this is something where people grapple with how do you extend care to something when you don't have much to share. So I'm getting here and I'm thinking here with concepts like solidarity, for example, that come with the understanding you need to have a common ground, but it also gives something away. It has to come at a cost of you, that these doings for others. And this is an example here that this cost is basically repaid in giving the person a sense of purpose and giving the possibility to nurture.
Yeah, excuse me, Stephanie, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Last slide, I'm wrapping up. So I'm going to not bore you with a long conclusion, but just with an invitation to extend the keynoters call for a new social contract to also make us think about how we formulate and articulate the language we use to phrase this contract. And with Barbara Preinsack here, I would call for metaphors that emphasize gardening and growth rather than mechanical metaphors around fixing broken systems. Thank you.
So,
So stop sharing, and then Sky.
okay, so thank you, Stephanie. Our next speaker is Sky Constantine, a PhD student from University of Queensland. Okay, all right, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, so I'll be speaking about some of the findings, some of the early findings from my PhD project, looking at the contributions of people with lived and living experience of homelessness to changing the services and policies that respond to that, and ideally to end homelessness. I was quite glad to be going after Steffa because I knew that that would be a nice kind of move in to the homelessness thing. But I actually think that there's a lot from this morning that connects really well with what I'll be talking about now, and particularly as Steffa picked up there about changing social contract and how we think about care more broadly and who gets to give and receive care. Also really appreciated Deborah's point about it's not what we use, it's how we use it, and looking at that. And I had one more comment that I'd grabbed. Ilan's post-welfare state idea and how that applies to what changed within the COVID context. So before I get into it in detail, just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and also note that what I'm talking about has a disproportionate impact on First Nations people in Australia, and that it has a disproportionate impact across a range of populations, including some that might be represented in what we're talking about today. And I think that this is, a lot of my interest is about how we learn from lived experience and how that changes the way we do things. And I think there's something really important about thinking about the different experiences that people bring and therefore the different lessons that are possible from that. So I signed up to be part of this workshop because of something one of my research participants said to me, and I'll go into the research details in a moment. But he brought together the ideas of work, care, homelessness, and learning from the COVID-19 context in this really beautiful way. And I saw the notice for the call out for this basically on the day that I was transcribing his interview, and I thought, well, I can't leave this alone. Doesn't relate that closely to my project, but it says something really important about we had this shared traumatic experience. Things changed really rapidly during that time. And there's a real question about how do we learn from that in terms of what's possible in the future and in terms of what other people experience. So for him, he's somebody who's got a long history of experiencing homelessness. He's actually doesn't identify as being within the homeless population. Now, he made that really clear at the beginning, but he still uses his history to advocate and educate for changes in these spaces. And I think that's really critical, that we experience something that was collectively life-changing, and particularly around ideas of what we can have security in and what we can't have security in. And that's where I think that our ideas about home and whether the centrality of that and the stability of that in financial changes came into question, alongside who can work, how they can work, whether that work is stable, you know, all of the stuff we're talking about today, who needs care, and particularly who needs care from government supports. And I think that's a really critical lesson that we had during the COVID period, is that in a time of crisis, we do become reliant on those greater structures for supports. And there are individuals' times of crisis that we see pre-COVID and that we see post-COVID, but there's a real opportunity for us to kind of think about how we sit in that and how we position others in that. One of the things that I will really quickly note as well is that homelessness interventions became unprecedented, the scale of those. And so we saw a whole lot of moving people off the streets into accommodations. And that's led to, you know, these discussions around, well, what do we learn about policy in those times? What do we learn about responding to issues? And this idea that we have inequalities in society that we see as kind of unchangeable, those wicked problems, but actually there is a possibility of having targeted solutions and working towards real change. I'll bang on about it so much. Lived experience involvement is crucial in this. We're all speaking from our own experiences. We risk just speaking from our own experiences when we don't listen to people who are actually going through these events. And that brings me to my methodology, which I will spend a little bit of time on. So basically, I'm doing a community-based participatory action research project. Really, big aspirational methodology, working with people who are affected by the research I'm doing, working collaboratively with them, working at co-learning. They get to tell me what to do. We look at having action after it. It's really tricky doing it with uni processes. I did ethics application really early on so that I could even talk to anybody, but had to put in provisional project plans and then meet with a group and go, this is what I'm thinking, but tell me to step off if I need to, tell me where I should be going. I'm working with 5 people who have a lived experience of homelessness, who are the consultative committee that I'm working with. They've got an advisory role on this. They thankfully did take up the invitation for that. They tweaked some of my project. They renamed themselves. They really didn't like the title I'd given them, so consultative committee was what sat better for them. And they very quickly said, you can't just get our advice and then go out and do the research yourself. People with lived experience need to talk to people with lived experience so that they can actually connect around those experiences. So we very quickly changed things to involve them as community researchers as well. It hasn't played out as simply as we expected in terms of having lived experience researchers. I've ended up doing the bulk of the interviews. To be frank with you though, I think that the possibility of being interviewed by a community researcher gave me more clout when I was talking to people about what I was doing. So I think that even though we didn't use them in the way that we thought we did, the relationships with community were really transformed by working together in this way. We've also looked at making sure that there's broad opportunities for participant involvement. So every research participant has been given the option of giving feedback on analysis. They all got to see this slide deck before I came out to this. There's a real sense of connection with the research as we go along. And the feedback from a lot of people has been that that changed the conversations they were having with us as well, because they felt that at other times a researcher had come in wanting these answers, moving away, and they don't see anything further. Whereas people were really quite, I can't think of the word, some of them were almost like, I don't want to put you out by being involved in analysis, you know, is that too much to ask for? But by having that, that sense of an ongoing relationship, I think we ended up getting more honesty in some of the answers than we would have otherwise. Another thing that I'll note here is just the importance of my own reflexivity, and oh my gosh, I will get to an answer really quickly. I'll just kind of comment here that we had debates about, it's a very ethical project, but what does that mean for rigor? Are we getting good data out of this? I will just say we're hitting data that we would not have hit if we didn't have the collaboration that we have going on. If I just got an advisory group and then I've led the project, there are things that I've seen that I would not have seen. I would have kept within my own view of things rather than being exposed to what being in community means. I'm going to really quickly talk about what they said needs to be done to end homelessness, because I think that it is worth, having some sort of sense of the answers, even though they're what we already know. So basically, almost everybody said housing is needed to end homelessness. What they said changed, but we know the answer. They know the answer. We're all there. They said the Will to Act is needed to end homelessness. Are we learning from what is actually needed? Are we learning from the research that's out there? A lot of them were quite embarrassed to say the Will to Act is needed because they were kind of like, I want to give you an answer that you can act on, but I don't know what to do with this. One person refused to answer that housing was the answer and actually said to me, I refuse to say that housing is the answer. Stigma. He has 10 years of experience of using his 40 years of experience with homelessness for education and advocacy. And he said, stigma is the only thing I will talk about in terms of changing systems to end homelessness, because we can build houses, but if we still have the attitudes that allow this to happen, we're going to build that house and we're going to see ourselves back in the same position again, and we're going to be pointing to another failure. We actually need to change the way we think about the people that we're working with. And you can see here, we need to come together in this. And so I'll really quickly go on the kind of the conclusion question of this, which is we had this big collective experience, this kind of we're all in it together. We know that we did not all have the same experience through that, but I think there's a real challenge for us in coming out of this really unexpected experience of how do we connect together with people with very different experiences towards the society we want to be in. Very quickly thank my collaborators who are absolutely amazing, and I will finish up there. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So our next speaker is Kitty Koshika.
Yes.
Okay. Kitty is Parliament researcher at the Office of Members of Parliament, YSR, Congress Party. Kitty, you share your screen, please. You got 10 minutes, and then I'm going to show you 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute. Okay? Are you able to share your screen? Do you see anything? Laura, is Laura over here? Oh, okay.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
Are you able to see my screen?
So can you please do the slideshow?
Is it visible now?
Yeah. Okay, all right. Okay, so yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, am I also visible now? So actually it's 7 in the morning in India, so I'm a little haggard and disoriented. But anyway, so hello everyone. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to share my views. The topic that I've chosen today is titled A Second Shift for Home, analyzing the dynamics of paid and unpaid care work among urban Indian women. This is a working paper and it's a fairly new one. It's maybe like a week old. So I'll be discussing my analysis based on the review that I've done of the available academic literature. Moving on to the background, we have to understand why such research is a significant one to be done at present. I thought of this topic after going through a survey related to time use. Time use studies investigate human activity inside and outside the paid economy. And while such surveys become an important part of evidence-based policy making, they also highlight the differences as to how men and women allocate their time, shedding light on the gender disparities in various aspects of life, especially in terms of paid and unpaid work. In 2019, the National Sample Survey Office of India conducted a survey that showed the following statistics as present in the slide, wherein only 21% of women were working in contrast to 69% of the men, but almost 94% of women were involved in unpaid caregiving and domestic activities. In addition to this, 94% rural and 89% urban women were involved in daily domestic work and spending over 5 hours daily providing these facilities to the household members. Additionally, academics who analyzed the survey indicated that the stronger the patriarchal norms of gender division in households, the less likely it is that the men share the household chores, even if they have the time. They also observed that in urban regions among middle class and upper middle class women, owing to the availability of disposable income, women tend to shift their responsibilities of unpaid labor to domestic workers who happily obliged to engage in this sort of work in exchange of a wage. Now coming to the major objectives that I would like to touch upon is to examine whether there's an intersectionality in terms of paid and unpaid work in India, to see if outsourcing one's domestic responsibilities is also related to the notions of division of labor and class formation, and to also understand whether flexible and hybrid working arrangements have any effect on the traditional gender roles in households. So I've been going on and on about unpaid labor, care work, and domestic responsibilities, but what exactly is it? So as per my understanding, unpaid work carries no direct remuneration or any other form of payment, but is needed in terms of household maintenance as well as to take care of the family, which contains some of the components as mentioned on the slide. Academic literature also points out that unpaid domestic labor is not separate or mutually exclusive from the economy of the capitalist system that especially India is in currently, but is very much a part of it and is an essential component for sustenance of availability of free wage labor. Now, I'll try to form a cohesive narrative linking the arguments on the available literature. In her seminal work, The Sociology of Housework, sociologist Anne Oakley stated that although women made up an important part of the workforce during her period of the study, housework largely remained gendered. They were still primarily women's jobs, and which meant that they had to endure a dual burden of not only paid but unpaid work at home as well. Additionally, their work was termed invisible as it wasn't recognized as a type of work deserving direct wages and hence did not fit into the societal perception of real work. This leads us to the concept of second shift as given by Arlie Hochschild, wherein women, as her research confirms, typically are the primary caregivers and remain responsible for keeping the household in order. And in most families, women's paid work is merely considered a job in contrast to a man's career. And thus, women's first responsibility is women's first shift, her employment is likely to be devalued, thereby rationalizing her continuing her second shift, which is her work at home. Now, moving on, Bridget Anderson in her book, Doing the Dirty Work, talks about the growing phenomena of outsourcing social reproduction, which can be explained as a response to women's increasing participation in the labor force. And here, outsourcing social reproduction often takes in form of purchasing inexpensive time enabled by hiring domestic workers. Here, outsourcing is significant as many working women are of the perception that their time is much more valuable and rather engaging in domestic chores, they would try to indulge in some sort of other paid work or self-care. Now, an extension to this is observed in the research conducted by White and Nair, who talk about how women from higher classes describe that their work consumes them entirely and outsourcing allows them to regain what they have lost during the workday. Additionally, construction of formal paid employment being valuable is connected to the notions of gender and class. And female participants in their research stated that they desired something more out of their life rather than being with their children on a full-time basis. And paid employment provides them with meaningful activity and allows them to be better mothers and remain sane, which they stressed is much more beneficial for their children. In their book, Cultures of Servitude, Rakare and Seaman Kayum discuss the links of gender to an assertion of class difference between domestic workers and female employers, which is organized around the construction of domestic work being termed as dirty work and is beneath the status of female employers. They describe that domestic workers in India not only perform the undesirable work traditionally in purview of women of the household, but in doing so make it possible for the employers to aspire to and maintain their middle or upper class status. Another study by Nair and Hoffman compares the dynamics of middle class women and domestic work, highlighting that in India, paid domestic work remains tied to the informal sector, where it is unregulated, poorly paid, and entrenched in caste and gender discrimination. And this critical issue remains that women themselves, who are the employers of domestic workers, are groomed to perpetuate the ideological devaluation of household work. This often implies a feudalistic attitude in terms of employers, where domestic workers are seen as mere help or servants. And they also believe that the employers also believe that the employment they provide is what allowed the domestic workers' household to survive, and therefore do not respond well to calls for higher wages. Lastly, with the COVID pandemic forcing employers to offer a more flexible working condition, studies indicate that though many women are open to this arrangement, it doesn't reduce their household responsibilities. Rather, pre-existing views on gender roles are perpetuated through flexible working, further traditionalizing gender roles in the labor market as well as in the household. A study also found that mothers working from home were found to be doing more unpaid work and childcare than those traditionally in offices. This literature indicates that despite progress, gendered housework persists, burdening women with a double shift. Outsourcing reflects a prioritization of paid work, yet reinforces traditional gender norms and devalues domestic labor. This underscores the need for continued efforts to challenge societal perceptions and achieve true gender equality. So in this context, what can be done? There is a need for better regulation in terms of securing rights of domestic workers, and in India, no such legislation is present. Indian labor laws do not adequately include domestic workers due to limited interpretation of the definition of a worker, employment, or an establishment, and if home as a private space can constitute as a place of work. The first legal recognition in the Unorganized Sector Social Security Act of 2008 meant to provide social welfare to workers, including domestic workers, but was replaced by the Code of Social Security in 2020, which is yet to be implemented. Additionally, provision for paternity leaves, paid leaves, and affordable childcare facilities could aid in relieving women from the burden of unpaid work. In addition, on-site childcare facilities and subsidies for childcare expenses should be available to both parents to alleviate the burden of caregiving responsibilities. With this, I would like to thank you all for listening to me patiently. Yeah, I'll just end it.
Thank you all speakers for keeping the time and
for lunch. So Laura Good, she's a PhD student at the University of Sydney, and Laura is doing really interesting work with what is that called, like Ulos and other kind of other big shops. So she would speak about that. And Laura, over to Laura now. Supermarket shop, yes, try to remember supermarket.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and apologies that I can't be with you in person. I would have loved to have been there today. Like we said, my research from my PhD is looking at supermarket work, and particularly thinking about this in terms of low wage, feminized service sector work. And what I've tried to do in this presentation is extend some of the findings that I've got about the impact of changing technologies and social processes around that, to thinking about what's the implication of this for care for supermarket workers and the caring that they're able to do. So broadly, the research problem that I've been interested in employment relations scholarship is this notion of digitalization and the way in which technologies are changing the experience of work, the organisation of work, and perhaps the role that gender might play in this experience. There's been a long history of feminist scholarship looking at the influence of gender and technology, from issues like the male dominance of the technology workforce to the way in which skills definitions have privileged male workers and rendered female skills as less skilled or invisible, thinking about issues of gender bias in algorithms, and even within particular occupations, the way in which the gender segregation and organisation of occupations may mean that experiences of changing work are different by gender. The particular context that I'm interested in is that of Australian retail. And in particular, while retail is one of the largest employers in Australia, it is quite a mixed industry. So it's about 54% women, so slightly more women, but broadly mixed. But within that, there's quite a lot of gender segregation in terms of occupation. So frontline, service sector workers, particularly checkout operators and cashiers, are predominantly feminised. And they also tend to be quite young workers, quite precariously employed, and quite low paid. There's also been dramatic technological change in retail over the past 15 years. So the introduction of online shopping has created new tasks in click and collect order fulfillment, but there's also been changes with self-service technologies, with things about automated rostering, changes to the logistics processes behind the technology, behind the operations of stores, and even, like we can see in this picture here, promised of a workerless store where customers go in and go out using their device, using surveillance cameras, and are able to shop without interacting with people altogether. So my research questions are, how does technological change affect the labour process of supermarket workers? Well, basically, not to attribute too much agency to the technology itself, but thinking about what does the labour process of a supermarket worker look like today? And then how does that affect their caring processes as well? What are the caring practices of supermarket workers? The methodology that I've been using is a three-phased mixed methods approach. So my PhD is embedded within a broader ARC project looking at gender and the future of work. So the first two phases were associated with that broader project. The first phase of which was in-depth interviews with industry stakeholders, so primarily employers, but also institutional actors like unions and representatives from employer associations. The second phase was an online survey of retail workers, of 1,160 Australian retail workers. And then the third phase, which I just finished last year, was participant observation of supermarket work in two different stores, one in which had been like a test case, an early adopter of changes to technologies, and one in which technology had been adopted a bit later, and shadowing and interviewing workers within those different stores. So in terms of brief findings from the first phase, thinking about what the experience of work in supermarkets is like today, there's a real sense of work intensification. So employees being expected to perform a greater variety of tasks at a greater speed, and even with rosters organised around customer demand, meaning that fewer workers are there in quiet times. While there may be more at busy times, it means that the downtime that workers previously used to have no longer exists to them, that there's a constant sense of needing to be doing something in the store. So this could be seen in the way in which workers were responsible for doing a variety of different tasks. So not only were they expected to be scanning products really quickly, they were also, what they said the main stress that came from the intensified work, so having fewer workers on store, was the emotional demands of customers. So looking at, for checkout workers, looking at long lines and having to see the frustration that customers were feeling and knowing that they really had little agency to help customers. Thank you. A second finding was about the ingenuity needed by workers. So as we can all imagine, having used self-service checkouts as customers ourselves, technological glitches are a common occurrence. So at one count in a particularly busy period, in 1 minute, I counted that workers were required to intervene in transactions 7 different times. So technology glitches are certainly nothing new, but in terms of the way in which they're dealt with in the supermarket, it seems to be while workers have basic training in the use of the technology, so being able to use the screens, being able to open the machines to change the order rolls, a lot of the learning about what to do when the technology glitches, what to do in different situations is learnt on the job by the workers themselves, either talking to one another or just figuring things out for themselves. So for instance, one person told me that they'd learnt how to fix payment errors just by restarting the machine through a process of trial and error, and they tried to tell other people that. But part of the job was just doing something to make customers feel that their issues were being addressed. So pressing the screen really quickly didn't necessarily do anything more effective, but it made the customer feel like their needs were being addressed in a more immediate manner. And then there were concerns from the unions that the digital technology skills needed to either fix technology problems or just interact with the technology in general, being seen by employers as something that workers naturally have, as something that they bring to the work from their skills in using digital technologies in everyday life, rather than something that employers are actively training or rewarding. And then this, I think, can be taken a bit further to think about, well, who are the workers that are using these digital skills? And it tends to be quite young workers who are assumed to have good technology skills in general, or women whose skills have been undervalued more broadly. And then the union was arguing that this could be just another way of seeing invisible skills for retail workers. The third point about customer interactions. I mean, customer interactions are always unpredictable, but at the self-service, it means that interactions have become shorter and often more brusque instead of the general process of welcoming customers, scanning their objects, asking how their day was. Workers were interacting with customers at a point in which there was a problem or an issue and that there needed to be a quick fix for the issue. And that unfortunately customers would take their frustrations with the glitch, with the process, with the lack of customer service out on the service worker themselves. And so the emotional labor that workers were performing was heightened during the self-service interactions rather than in the normal course of customer interactions. So what I've done for this presentation is try to think about what are the differences perhaps for care work. Thank you. And with the survey, one of the things we did was looked at workers' responses to whether they felt sufficiently trained in the use of technology, whether they felt rostering technology was effective, whether it was fair for people with caring responsibilities, and whether they had control. And then I disaggregated that by different groups and thought about, do workers who have caregiving responsibilities, so this was a self-reported, do you have current caring responsibilities or not? Are the responses of these workers different, holding into account other demographic factors? And we found by and large that workers with caregiving responsibilities didn't feel any less trained. They didn't feel any differences in the effectiveness of the use of technologies. So I thought that was quite interesting that there weren't significant differences, and overall people were generally broadly supportive of the way in which digital rostering had taken place and the use of digital technologies more broadly, which contrasts to some of the literature. And just briefly, what I want to talk about here is this notion of care theft. So Cordes and colleagues from the University of New South Wales have created what I think is a really useful typology, thinking about the way in which work-life balance perhaps can be affected by employment practices and conditions rather than an individual sense of what is work-life balance, really thinking about, well, how can things like scheduling, like low pay, affect the resources that employees have for caring? And what I would argue from the findings that I presented earlier are that the intensification of work, the interactions with customers, the need for ingenuity, all of those sorts of things deplete workers' energy so that they have stressful work, which can lead to less energy for caring, as well as the depleted time resources and depleted financial resources that have been documented in other parts of the literature, which we didn't necessarily find in our findings yet. So thinking about how that pieces all together, what I would say is changes in the store can contribute to care theft. So particularly in terms of the moral orientations to care, the energy that people have for care. Work intensification can involve increased emotional labour demands, as well as speed and pace of tasks. And it's important to think about all these sorts of things when we're considering employee dissatisfaction with digitalisation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Laura. Great paper. So we'll take questions after Faisal's presentation. So now, Mohammed Faisal is also a PhD student. He's doing PhD at the University of Queensland. And he's going to talk about algorithmic curation and user agency in digitized public employment services. Oh, sorry.
Switch it on the panel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last presentation of this part of the symposium. I'm Mohammed Faisal, a second year, almost end of the second year, doctoral student at the University of Queensland with the School of Social Science and associated with the IDMS Center. Today, I came here with some insight from my doctoral project, which mostly focused on how Australian job seekers are using and interacting the digital service window of Workforce Australia Online for their welfare benefit. For this presentation, I will focus on one of its features, namely job search engine as a reflection of institutional care and the experience of job seekers with it. Before we begin, I acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land on which we gather today and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I want to start with providing a brief idea about my PhD. At first, in May 2022, Australian government reformed its public employment service by including a self-service digitalized self-service delivery mechanism via a digital dashboard. While it promised to streamline job seeking process, it has also sparked a debate about the service accessibility, usability, and fairness. As it is the first of its kind in the world as a pioneering endeavors, and there were significant concern around it, I decided to explore the lived experience of the intended user. Obviously, my research began with a research question. Here it is, whether this system address or fail to address the need of culturally and linguistically diverse job seeker via digital dashboard. Here I took Carl job seeker as research target group because they are one of the 13 predisposed and marginalized group in Australia in terms of employment. And I wanted to get answer these research questions directly from the intended user of this new system. For that, I adopted a mixed method approach. It's a traditional qual-quant approach. And the qual section is informed by interview and observation, and the quant section is informed with the survey. I hope this blend allows to capture a comprehensive picture of the user experience. But today I came with some of my qualitative findings. Now I'm turning to my focus for today's presentation, which is like the lived experience of job seeker with the functionality of the Workforce Australia online job search platform within a care setting. Or this system care the intended user or not. For this presentation or for this section, I plan to integrate these 4 theoretical lenses. To deepen the understanding of the findings, each lens offers unique insight that help us to see beyond the surface of digital user interactions. This slide shows how a diverse participant pool I have, which have, I have participants from all age group, diverse ethnicity, with academic background, who have Australian degree, non-Australian degree, who speak multiple languages, and they are navigating their different career stage of their life. And most importantly, they are from different part of the world, almost from all continent and region. These slides are the screenshot from the Workforce Australia online dashboard, which I'm talking about. And this screenshot actually depict the or visualize the key component and functionalities of the job search feature. The first one is the main one actually. It's expanded further, and which has a 2 key area where user can input the keywords for their desired job position and preferred location. And afterward it moves on. Then second figure illustrates how user can enter the keyword according to their job preference. And afterward, mostly narrow down the next 3 slides, mostly related to the location, narrow down and prefer based on their preferred location. And I took this screenshot from the Workforce Australia online website. These are the instructions how to use this job search tool. It's kind of prescription from the government side. Now I will go to what I found in the field. In my findings, the 3 major themes emerge. The job seeker often struggle with the digital literacy and access issues. They face mismatch in job search output according to their aspiration and show a strong preference for human over digital interactions. First of all, the key findings is the prevalence of digital literacy challenges, which also accumulated by the access issues. Almost 80% users struggle to navigate the basic functionalities of job search system, which significantly impede their ability to seek employment by a digital dashboard. If I go to the this slide, you have seen that you need to use the Boolean operator to search the job, but almost 90% of my participants do not use that one, and they don't know how to use that one. For example, Miriam, an Egyptian mother navigating the aftermath of significant life change followed by divorce, faced the dual challenges of language barrier as she is an Arabic speaking lady, and for a long time her husband was only breadwinner for the family, and she was not allowed to go beyond the door of the house, and came just 4 years back as a wife of a skilled migrant. So followed by her divorce, she is in a new land and face the dual challenge of language barrier and digital unfamiliarity. Even though she is a graduate, she has a graduation from Egyptian University, she can read, write English proficiently, and she has a very good up-to-date smartphone. Based on that, she was moved toward the online service of Workforce Australia Online. Her voice shows that her interaction with the system were marked by confusion and desperate need for the support. Secondly, another critical area is the mismatch between the system output and the user need. The system often fails to provide relevant job recommendation, which can be frustrating for the user and limit their job search process. I want to put another example here. The Julia, armed with an MBA and rich career in creative sector, found herself adrift in a sea of irrelevant job match. Her super proficient English and impressive resume seems to vanish into the digital ether, leaving her with the offer that there is nothing for her. And afterward, finally, I want to put the main findings, which also highlight a significant preference for human interaction. Many users find digital interface inadequate and seek more personalized support through direct contact. Interestingly, almost none of my participants receive any training on how to use this job search engine and its other feature. On the basis of above findings, if I took the first theoretical lens, socio-technical system theory, which allows us to see how Workforce Australia's job search engine's effectiveness is not just about technological arrangement, but how it integrate into the social lives of job seeker on welfare benefit, influenced their engagement and satisfaction. User agency theory emphasizes the autonomy job seeker hold over their job search process, critically assessing whether the system truly allows them to navigate and control their job search effectively. Care ethics challenge us to consider whether the Workforce Australia job search system is designed with the intention and functionality to genuinely support and care for its user, especially those most vulnerable. And the capacity approach looks at whether the system enhances job seekers' real freedom, capability, questioning if the technology empowered them or limit their potential to achieve meaningful outcome. By synthesizing these theoretical insights, we gain a multidimensional analysis of job search system, underscoring the need for improvement that are technologically effective, socially sensitive, ethically responsible, and empowering for all users. Thank you for your attention. I now welcome any question.
Thank you very much. Great paper, Faisal, and you are my PhD student, so I'm not gonna say much. Other people will say.